on the Really True Sports Network. I am your co-host for the championship game recap, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I'd like to welcome in my co-host. First up, 1981 national champion, which the impressive thing there is he's still alive because he's really old. Steve Risley, how you doing, Steve?
Doing great. And after last night, the private club gets just a little bit bigger.
What club is that?
National Championship Club.
Oh, okay. Next up, we've got Sam Teets, who picked Illinois to win it all. How you doing, Sam?
I could be doing better, but it was a fun game last night. I actually thought, it was kind of a one-sided game. I did have fun watching it.
All right, and next up, the man, the myth, the legend. He picked the national champion at the start of this show 3 weeks ago. Unfortunately, he picked him to beat Texas. But help me welcome to the show, Sam McGinnis. How you doing, Sam?
I'm doing pretty good.
All right, last night, I don't think any of us expected to see what we saw, Riz.
No, I not at all. But I think both teams come to the court with a game plan of what they want to do, and certainly the game plan that Baylor designed is what I'm sure both teams designed. The execution was just there right at the beginning from the get-go. I tell you what it looked like was Baylor came out wanting to take possession, and Gonzaga looked like they were tired for some reason, or just not as pumped as I thought they would be. And basically Baylor shot lights out, which is what you need to do. And they set the control, the pace, the tempo right from the get-go. And I think they put Gonzaga in a position they haven't been in all season. And they just were reeling, trying to figure out how to deal with that.
Yeah, and Sam Teets, when we look at this, I thought the difference to me was Timmy and Kispert, who just defensively were overwhelmed. They couldn't play defense to save their lives against Baylor.
Well, and this is why I'm kicking myself for not picking Baylor the other day, because I said that Baylor has a much better defense and that the issue with Gonzaga is their defense is not on the same level. We saw it against UCLA. And when you look at guys like Timmy, he's a big guy, but he doesn't really have much lift to him. He's not going to be a shot blocker or a rim protector there. And the offensive rebounds were huge for Baylor. It started right away on the first shot, the first possession of the game. I think they had 2 or 3 offensive rebounds there alone. They had 16 on the night compared to 5 for Gonzaga. So Timmy got pushed around the boards, and Kispert, again, another guy who just does not elevate. We saw him drive to the basket a couple times on offense and get blocked because he just doesn't have the ability to get past those defensive players. And on the other end, didn't contribute much. Suggs is probably your best defender for Gonzaga, maybe, and he had foul trouble throughout the night. So really, they were in a bad spot to begin with.
Yeah, and McGinnis, I think the best point Sam Teets made yesterday, which is when he made it, is when I was kind of like, yeah, I went with Gonzaga because I picked him at the start. But I thought the best point you made, Sam Teets, was about the bench. And I think the bench was the huge difference here in the game. I think that's why Gonzaga looked tired, because Baylor's constantly bringing guys in. Gonzaga just kind of has to go with who they have.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw them make numerous changes throughout the game. And honestly, I think a lot of this is also Baylor defended a lead correctly. You can only hold Gonzaga to so many points. They held them to, 70?
Yeah.
70. Yeah, so the thing about defending leads, and especially in basketball, is you defend a lead by continuing to score. That's how you do it, and that's what Baylor did the whole night. So I got to give them credit for not just.
And I'll tell you, Sam. The thing that really got me was when it got to this 14-minute mark. I think the lead had been cut to 9 or 10, and it looked like Baylor was having a hard time scoring. And then I'm thinking right there, well, Gonzaga's going to get them. This next 4 or 5 minutes is what's really important. But after the timeout, they come out and they get a 6-0 run, and they get right back to the lead that they had originally.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of that has to do. Oh, sorry, McGinnis, you go ahead. You'll be it's you.
It is me. Okay.
Wait, I'm going to interject real quickly. From now on, we're going to call Sam McGinnis Mr. Authority for the rest of the show, since he's the only one that picked the game right. So when you're addressing Sam McGinnis, just say, Mr. Authority, what do you think?
I would, but he did pick him to play Texas. Go ahead, McGinnis.
I did pick him to play Texas. Didn't Texas lose in the first or second round?
Texas has got a new head coach today. That's how bad they did in the tournament.
Oh, goodness. But yeah, I think more teams need to take the mentality of defending a lead by continuing to score. If you get up and then you continue to score, it doesn't matter how many points the other team scores because you're still going to be ahead.
Yeah, and when we look at this, I've heard people talk
Hey,
about
Mike, my kind of question for you, if I could,
Sure.
while we're on this type of subject, because I'm not going to let you get away with answering questions too. What effect did the UCLA game have on the start of Gonzaga? Did it have any? Mentally drained, physically drained a little bit? Was there any effect from the UCLA game you can attribute to Gonzaga's start? Because Gonzaga, that's the worst start I've seen that team make all season, the opportunities I've had to watch them.
I don't think so. I mean, I've seen people post that. I think it may have had a little bit of effect. I saw one guy post on there that if you think that them being tired was a problem, then you don't know basketball because they play 2 or 3 AAU games. But my thing is this, Steve, you know this better than anybody here. There's a big difference between playing 3 AAU games and playing one NCAA semifinal where basically it feels like your life depends on it.
Sure.
I think it could have had something to do with it. It reminded me a little bit, 1979, Indiana State went undefeated all the way to the championship game. They played Michigan State, and they played terrible in that game. They started off slow, got behind 10 to 15 points. It kind of stayed there all night. I mean, Larry Bird misses like 8 free throws in that game. And when you look at the Saturday, they beat DePaul and Mark Aguirre 35 or 75-74, something like that, 74-73. It was a great game. Michigan State with Magic Johnson and Greg Kelser beat Penn by like 40 points. So I think it does play into effect a little bit. But let me turn this around on you, Steve. Is the biggest point of this game or the biggest issue in November or December when Gonzaga was supposed to play Baylor and it got canceled by COVID? The reason I asked that is this. It looked to me like Gonzaga had no answers because they weren't used to a team that played defense like that. If they play a game in November or December, maybe they're more prepared to play this game.
I would agree with you. I that was one of the benefits of playing every team in the Big Ten twice. When you saw them the second time, you really had a good understanding of what they were going to do. You had game film of you playing them, not somebody else playing them, how our team's going to react to their team. So not playing that game, I think, and Sam is saying, please jump in on this. I think that had a profound effect on Baylor or Gonzaga's preparation. And I really do, because they just look like they didn't know what Baylor was going to do next. And weren't prepared for the onslaught they got at the beginning of the game. Sam, your thoughts on that? Did not playing that have any effect?
I absolutely agree with you, because I think it would have been interesting to see how that changed the game. But if you watch Gonzaga very early on, there were some very uncharacteristic turnovers. They had balls just bouncing around, dribbling the balls at their own feet almost, to the point where they were throwing the ball away in the backcourt. They had a lot of issues there going. I think part of it was the way Baylor's guards were attacking Gonzaga up front, basically pushing them back, keeping them out of three-point range, and really keeping them from driving. And then on the interior, Timmy kind of got pushed around a little bit. I mean, he was really taken out because they were front guarding him. They were fronting the post, making it hard to put it in the interior. So you couldn't get Timmy the ball in the post and run the offense out of the low post like they like to do. And Baylor's defense just was suffocating all night. We saw all the turnovers. We saw Suggs lose the ball a couple of times. And Kispert really wasn't getting a chance to make those open shots he usually gets. And because Baylor had that deep bench, Baylor could be over-aggressive. We saw a bunch of Baylor guys get in foul trouble towards the end of the game, but they could afford to have those fouls because you have 3 deep on the bench. And that's something that Gonzaga didn't have.
Yeah. Right. Sam McGinnis, West Coast Conference versus Pac-12, or Big 12, I'm sorry. Was there an effect there? I mean, did that make it? To me, it did, because I just think you play a harder quality of opponents all season long. And I think where the fallacy comes is, had Gonzaga played in the Big 12, would they be undefeated going into that game? I don't believe they would have.
I still think they could have been. I'm not even sure. I think the Baylor game, to Mike's point earlier, definitely would. I think if they had played Baylor, they would have won this game earlier. If they had lost to Baylor earlier in the season, they would have won this one. And it kind of looked a little bit like lack of preparation, but also to the point on foul trouble. I noticed, I'm not sure there was a point in the game where Baylor didn't have a ridiculous number of fouls compared to Gonzaga.
Well, I can tell you this. I don't think it would have mattered. I think Baylor's beaten them today, even if they'd or last night, even if they'd have played them in November or December. I think from what I saw, Baylor was the better basketball team. And that's saying a lot because I think Gonzaga is really good. But I think you can't – I mean, even if you play that game in November or December, I think it may make this game closer because Mark Few's a really good coach. But it's not going to make Kispert and Timmy play better defense. I mean, it's just not. And the problem was they couldn't score at the rate they usually score. Now, you play most teams, you give up 70 points, you think you didn't play that good defensively. But you play Gonzaga, you hold them to 70. That's 22 points under what they average. So I think maybe they could have attacked Baylor's defense differently. But also, if they play in November or December, remember this, Scott Drew's a really good basketball coach. He took Baylor from nothing 18 years ago to being a national champion. So I think when we say, and I do think it would have an effect, but I don't know how much of an effect because, Scott Drew would have also got to see Gonzaga. So when you look at that, this is not like this is Mark Few against, Archie Miller, where, if you see it one time, and it's not a shot at Archie Miller, it obviously is, but I want her to sound nice. But if you've got a coach that's just average going against a great coach, I think playing in November or December, you could have turned that over and won the game. But I think what you had is a great coach against a great coach.
And the fact that, you're still at Baylor, Scott Drew's still there after 18 years, considering where he took the program over, is exceptional because most guys get to programs like that and they're fired within 2 or 3 years.
Or they take a better job once they, start to do good.
Exactly. So the fact that he's still there and they got to this point is pretty exceptional.
There's a lot of schools that 10 or 12 years ago were a lot better jobs than Baylor. Scott Drew has turned Baylor into an elite job when he leaves.
Wait, and I think Few's did the same thing for Gonzaga at this point, too. Both those guys have really taken their programs to new levels. And just speaking on Baylor, because I know we give all the hype to Kispert and Timmy and Jalen Suggs, but Baylor had some good players as well. Davion Mitchell and Jared Butler. Those two guys were all defensive members in their conference.
The kid from Cincinnati was the star of the game, I think.
Which one's that? Is that Teague you're talking about?
Yeah, dropped 19 points. It doesn't seem like that kid ever misses. I don't know how he only had 19 points.
Oh, Masio Teague. Yeah, I mean, they had some – and they came out firing, too, from three-point arc. They were 10 for 23 from three-point range, but they missed a couple ones late in the game. Realistically, they were probably shooting about 50% when they were trying from three, which is just insane.
Well, how about this? You talked about Mark Few. I don't think he's made Gonzaga that kind of program. Not as long as they're in the West Coast Conference. I mean, number one, why do I want to go to Gonzaga? I could not top what Mark Few's done. Even if he never wins a national championship, he's been to 3 Final Fours, a couple national championship games. I'm not going to do that there because what he's done is special. To me, I would equate it to Al McGuire and what he did at Marquette, Riz. I mean, you look at it, he built Marquette up over a 15-year process or so, wins a national championship, he leaves. They're an independent. They're never the same again. They're in the Big East. They had the Final Four with D. Wade to one time. But I don't think that Gonzaga is the type of job, unless they were getting a Pac-12, and I don't think the Pac-12's ever letting them in because they don't have a football team.
Yeah, but would it be fair to say, Mike, I think both Drew and Few are permanent where they are now. I don't see one.
No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is once they leave, and I don't mean that Drew's leaving for another job.
No, I think he's there for life now.
I just mean when he's gone and when Few's gone, I think Baylor has been filled in to where they are a big-time power, especially if they continue to do this the rest of Drew's time. And Drew's not an old guy.
No, he's very young.
With Few, when he leaves 5 years from now, and he's been to 4 Final Fours, even if he's won a national championship, I still don't know that Gonzaga is going to be an elite job just because he's in the West Coast Conference. Plus, you've got to follow Mark Few at a mid-major.
Right. Great observation.
That's a good point, ain't it, Teets?
No, that's a good one. I see what you're saying. They have gotten some better recruits though in recent years. They've gotten some NBA talent into that program.
Because of Mark Few.
Exactly. So I guess if he were to retire or whatever, I guess you could say, yeah, it'd be probably more difficult. It's not going to be as easy as North Carolina recruiting. North Carolina changing head coaches and still probably getting cap recruits.
And if you remember on our show when we talked about who North Carolina's next coach was going to be, I unequivocally told you who it would be a week ago, correct?
Yeah, you said it wouldn't be a great move.
I didn't say it wouldn't be. I said that's who it'll be. I don't know what it'll be. I don't think when you go to a place like North Carolina, unless you're Roy Williams, the downside is a lot bigger than the upside. But
expectations are so high.
McGinnis,
wouldn't North Carolina love to have Few?
Wouldn't everybody love to have Few?
Yeah, but North Carolina, that's almost a good fit.
I mean, if you look at what Mark Few's done at Gonzaga, what if he'd have been at a place like a Duke or in North Carolina or even in Indiana? I mean, he's going to win no matter where he goes because he's a great coach.
Yeah, I remember
and the same thing can be said for Scott Drew.
I remember sitting next to Few at a breakfast in Indianapolis when Adam Morrison was the player of the year. And J.J. Redick was coming out, and Few was at the table. I was at the next table. We were like a foot apart, 2 feet apart. I was begging him to come to IU.
That's the night that you called me because you needed to be bailed out because the cops came and took you away from him?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I thought. All right. McGinnis, what do you have to say? I mean, you have to be enjoying Teats being made look bad with his Mark Few takes and everything, huh?
Well, I think it's funny now that for the second time on 2 championships, he's picked against himself even after he makes great points. Like, he talks about defenses both times, and both times picks the other team.
You're supposed to be on my side here, McGinnis. I don't understand where this animosity is coming from here, man.
All right, there is one way, Teats, that you can make this all go away, and you'll never be made fun of again.
Predict a championship, right?
What, watch Hoosiers?
I'm sure you watched it last night, correct?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Right after the game at like 12 o'clock at night. Yeah, I totally watched Hoosiers.
I don't like the sarcastic tone of this.
Man, we watched, C was over at 8 o'clock here, so we watched Jeopardy. Aaron Rodgers needs some work.
Well, so it was like Aaron Rodgers was in the NFC Championship game all over again, huh?
No, he hosted Jeopardy last night.
I know, but Jeopardy's dead because you can't follow Alex Trebek just like you can't follow Mike Krzyzewski or Bob Knight.
There you go.
But so let me ask you this. I'm going to start with Teats here. The transfer portal. There's like well over 1,000 players in the transfer portal now. What's going on in college basketball and what can they do about this? Because this seems like it's getting a little bit out of hand.
Yeah, it certainly does. And you're at a point now where guys can go to smaller programs, perform incredibly well, and then transfer up to bigger and better schools to increase their ability to probably get drafted and increase their exposure. And also, just if they want to go win a tournament, if they're just going to win a championship, they can go to the bigger schools. I don't know what the right decision is because I like giving power to the players in the situation, especially when you're not being paid money necessarily. I know you're getting those scholarships that don't really matter because you're not necessarily taking real classes at those schools. So let's be honest about that. So I don't really know what the right answer is.
Whoa. I take great offense to that statement. I got a degree in business management and administration.
So did Dexter Manley, and he couldn't read and write, so I don't want to hear it.
Yeah, well, no, that may be true at some universities, but in Indiana, you go get your degree.
Wasn't there was a scandal, wasn't that at UNC a couple of years ago where like they were teaching guys Swahili or something like that?
We interviewed Rashad.
Yeah, Rashad McCants. And
we interviewed him, and I was appalled at what he had to say versus how we did things in Indiana.
Yeah. What I remember from McCants, Risley, was he actually was asking to take real classes.
Yeah, he was.
Let him.
They were picking his classes for him and placing him in classes. What do you have to take, Swahili or something like that?
I don't know what it was. Yeah. I mean, I know at Ohio State the big degree for football players is basket weaving, correct, Teats?
I think that's actually classes in some of these cases. I think it really is.
There are classes like that. When I went to Indiana State, my major was sports studies.
Oh, look, my major was sports communications, and I wasn't even an athlete. So look
I'm
at
not
that.
even sure what sports studies is. They just told me it'd be easy. And then I got to take basic tennis my first year. And I never had to go to class. You just had to show up, and they played a tournament at the end, and the teacher would grade you.
Dang, Marcus Carter, I see someone that looks 12 years old. I hope you're talking about me.
He's obviously talking about me.
Marcus, I hope to God you're talking about me. That I got more hair than all three of those idiots combined.
You know what? If hair mattered, Don King would be a good man and he'd get to heaven. Marcus makes a good point here. Put those hands together, guys. Baylor was like a whole team of gloves out there. Gary Payton. He's right. It looked like 5 Gary Paytons running around there defending everybody. And the thing that struck me was I didn't see Gonzaga even attempt to try to screen a whole hell of a lot, Steve, to be able to do anything.
No, I'm just trying to piece together what went through Gonzaga's mind, because because we see a fair amount of Gonzaga here on the West Coast, and this was just a different Gonzaga team that showed up. I mean, McGinnis or Mr. Authority, did Baylor take him out of it, or did Gonzaga take themselves out of it?
With Gonzaga.
That's a question. That's a legitimate question.
I know. I'm not dissing your question.
I know you're not.
The way Gonzaga played in the past, Authority. I don't think Gonzaga took themselves out of this. I think Baylor was just better. Yeah. I don't think it's a Gonzaga thing to do to choke or be that way. And we saw.
Wouldn't you think an undefeated team at 30-0 would have a plan for this when somebody comes at you with this kind of magnitude, and you can handle this?
How about this?
They couldn't do anything to stop Baylor. Right. Baylor had a slump going at the end of the first half, and Gonzaga got it to 10. They couldn't budge that piece of rock any farther than that.
Remember this, though. When you talk about they were 30-0, I think Baylor, Teach, you can correct me if I'm wrong. You probably followed it closer than I did. But at one point, Baylor was like 20-0. And then they had like 2 or 3 weeks where they couldn't play because of COVID.
Yeah, and then they came back and they lost, I think, Oklahoma State with Cade Cunningham's arguably going to be the number 1 pick in the draft, and Kansas as well, I believe.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this. If you watched this game last night, you can use all the excuses you want. But in the end, the best team won. And I think that if Baylor played Gonzaga 7 times in a 7-game series, I think it would be 4-2 Baylor. I think Baylor is just the best basketball team in the country. And I think they were undersold because basically we talk about how West Coast teams are always overlooked. Big 12 basketball is always overlooked. And if we look at it, Texas Tech was real close to winning a national championship the last tournament 2 years ago. Kansas is always there. Oklahoma State. The Big 12 is head and shoulders above the Big 10 and has been for this entire century. And I think they've been better than the ACC over the entire century. Of course, that's only 20 years, but I'm trying to be dramatic.
I mean, look at what Baylor's Baylor.
I don't think it's a bold statement, Steve.
Baylor. Last year, when of course the pandemic hit, wasn't Baylor the number 1 team in the country before the pandemic hit?
I know
they were in a position where they could have legitimately won last year if we had the tournament. So realistically, I don't think it's a stretch to say recently they've been very dominant, or at least very overlooked, because Baylor was a team that could have been in a position to win last year.
Well, Steve, I don't think there's any debate that the Big 12 has been better than the Big 10.
Well, they've been more successful. Yeah, so that would make them better. Yeah, exactly.
Well, what else would make you better?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I can't give you a measure that you're not going to shred and rip apart. How many Big 12 players, Big 12 teams made the tournament?
What year?
This past year.
I don't know. Teach, you know that?
7, I believe.
And how many Big 10 teams made it?
Let me count real quick. Big 10.
8? I think it was 8.
Yeah. How many teams made the Sweet 16 from the Big 12 compared to the Big 10? How many teams were in the Final Four when you compare the two?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I didn't want to really say that because we could get into a stupid debate that means nothing about that. Right now, the Big 12 is a better conference. Their team won the national championship, and it's a rough – that's a conference that plays, in my opinion, a lot like the Big 10. Or the Big 10 plays a lot like them right now. However you want to say which
I don't
better.
think so. I think that the Big 12 actually plays more modern basketball. They run, they shoot. Oklahoma, those are all teams that score. I mean, they're not grinders that just beat each other up. The difference is this.
It's a physical conference.
They have guards. I don't know. Tease, do you think the Big 12 is a real physical conference?
I mean, we go off how Baylor played last night maybe, but I don't think not in the same level at the Big Ten is. When I think about the Big Ten, I think about just guys like Aaron Kraft from Ohio State, guys who are not like great scorers, but guys who just like beat the crap out of you defensively. I don't think the Big 12 is like that right now. I think the Big 12 is full of guys who know how to shoot.
But I think this. I believe that the guards in the Big 12 are more physical than the guards in the Big 10. I think they're more aggressive when they guard, and that's why I think if you look at it, what do we always say? We always say the team with the best guards usually wins. And that is almost always the case. And what you have with Baylor are aggressive big guards that can shoot the ball, that'll get in your grill, and they've got 4, 5, 6 of them, so they can just continuously run them at you and wear out your shooters. So I think when you talk physicality, I think everybody thinks inside. All the physicality is inside. In the Big Ten, the physicality is inside. If you watch the Big Ten, and Riz, we've talked before about why they fail in the tournament. I think the reason they fail in the tournament is lack of guard play, defensive guard play.
Yeah.
Because I think when you look at the Big 12 teams, even in Oklahoma State, these are teams that defensively can D you up from the perimeter and make life a living hell on you. And when guard play is the most important thing, I think people are missing the one big factor. Everybody talks about the team that's got the Isaiah Thomas or the Mateen Cleaves. The thing to me is the team that's got the defensive guards where you can control the pace of the game with your guards is what wins. Not necessarily that the guard can shoot or not, but whether they can impose their will defensively on you. Because when that happens, you make these guys work so hard on offense that it takes away from their defense. And before you know it, you're 8 minutes into a national championship game and you're getting wide open looks from 20 feet.
And just going off what we saw last night, the guards were swarming for Baylor. I felt like Baylor was just out hustling Gonzaga for most of the first half. Obviously, Gonzaga was trying to win, but I felt Baylor was diving on the ground. Baylor was getting loose balls they probably should not have been getting to. And even whenever Timmy tried to put the ball on the ground, they had one big man on him, and then a guard would come around from his backside and rip the ball.
Take it from him, yeah.
So I think that's just, the guards, like I said, they were swarming last night. The guards for Baylor were more active defensively than anything Gonzaga put forward.
Yeah, I thought it was impressive. I thought it was the best college basketball team I've seen overall in a long time, Sam McGinnis.
Yeah, and to Sam Teet's point, I think that goes back to game planning, having the guards come around like that. And the turnover ratio was ridiculous, too. I kept watching. See, Gonzaga would get the turnovers, but they wouldn't score on them. That's the problem I found with them. Well, Baylor would score on almost every turnover they got.
Well, I don't even think it's the turnovers. I just think it's the rebounds, because I remember seeing at halftime when Gonzaga was down 10, I thought they're really lucky, because if you looked at it at halftime, I think there had been twice as many shots taken by Baylor. And it was mind-blowing. The only thing that kept them in the game was the free throws.
Yeah, they were nailing.
Yeah, because at the time, I think Baylor had maybe 2 free throws compared to 12 or 14 from Gonzaga. So really, that's what kept them in the game at the time. But even looking at the final box score, 67 shots put up by Baylor compared to 49 from Gonzaga. Almost a 20-point difference. And the offensive rebounds go in favor 16-5 in favor of Baylor. And that's the difference in the game.
Yeah. So, it was, to me, I just thought it was impressive, Risley. When you looked at that, it reminded me, if you want to compare it to 1981, you had a team that seemed like they hit every shot and they defended everything violently. And when I say that, they may have fouled a lot, but they had enough bodies to do it. You guys had like 8 bodies that could do it. And they just imposed their will. And there's nothing I like to see more in a sporting event than a team that can impose their will on the other team.
Yeah, well, you got to remember in 81 too, and I don't want to revert back to our game. That's 40-something years ago, but they had Al Wood, who was consensus All-American, James Worthy, who was consensus All-American, and Sam Perkins, who was on a few All-American team. And we did. The whole story there was their front line was going to dominate that game, and we imposed our will. Ray, Landon, Ted, myself, Jimmy Thomas, all the guys that came in and handled those guys. They were just marginalized, kind of like Baylor's or Gonzaga's inside game was. They were just marginalized to non-existent and not relevant in the game for the rest of the time.
Hey, Steve, real quick. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I have a question that goes back to what we talked about before. A lot of people forget. You guys lost 9 games that year. I think loss number 7 was to North Carolina at North Carolina. Did that make a difference already playing them and already of seeing them? And let's face it, Dean Smith was a really good coach, but he's not Bobby Knight. There was a big coaching difference there. And that game goes from being, I think you guys lost by like 8 or 9 points to a 13-point win a couple months later. Do you think that game's more difficult if you didn't have that first loss to them?
I'm thinking, and I can tell you right now, as I sit here today, 40 years later, I don't ever recall even thinking about the first game against North Carolina. We may have watched some film of that game. I'm sure we did, but I have no recollection of it, and I have no recollection of us using the first game as any kind of a motivator or anything.
I'm not talking about a motivator. I'm talking about with a coach like Bob Knight, to already have played them once, because Bob Knight was a guy that if you beat him to one time, it's like everybody always said, 1984, Indiana beats Dean Smith in North Carolina with like 4 freshmen and Uwe Blob.
Yeah.
And the thing was that Indiana had played on, I believe, Saturday and beaten like Richmond or Auburn. And then they got till Thursday to play Dean Smith in North Carolina, and Knight just completely outcoached him. Now, I think if you flip it, and Indiana had to play after only 1 day's rest against that North Carolina team, they might lose the game. What I'm saying here is just the fact that Knight had already seen them in person once. I know this, as when I've coached, if I play a team once, that's a little bit more difficult than the second time. If I've already seen them once, I'm probably going to beat them the second time.
Yeah, that may have had an effect on Knight. Although I will say this, and Knight's mentality was always our opponent is not who we're playing. Our opponent is our ability to play to our potential. If we play to our potential, we can beat anybody. And he genuinely felt that, and that's how he coached us. So while we did game preparation, and we did a boatload of game preparation. I changed my word there. A boatload of game preparation for every game. But it was more, practice was more geared toward how well can you maintain your effort, kind of what Baylor did last night. Baylor played to their potential last night and sustained it for the better part of that basketball game.
Yeah, but I can tell you this. I mean, as a coach, I've always told my teams we're not worried about the other team. We're just trying to play as well as we can.
Sure, right.
That's what I tell my team because that's all I want my team to think about.
Same mentality, right.
But I am still watching that film by myself trying to figure out what we need to do because I want my players just to worry about what they got to worry about. I'm going to worry about the other stuff.
I mean, the biggest thing I remember was going up to Worthy, Perkins, and Wood and going, hey, guys, good to see you again. You kind of become acquaintances when you play a team like that at that caliber and you're Indiana and North Carolina. You kind of have mutual respect for each other where you're playing. And I remember we jawed back and forth with Worthy, Perkins, and those guys, and in a fun way, and until the game got really serious.
Yeah. And then you tried to hurt him.
Being fun. No, that was just Carter Scott. That was Carter Scott in 1980.
Well, that was Ohio State. That's a little different.
Ohio State. Knight gave us permission to hurt Ohio State because they hate what he hates what they did to Fred Taylor.
Carter Scott's, I think, didn't he graduate with a degree in paper mache from Ohio State University?
I don't know what Carter Scott got his degree in.
I guess
I'm not going to knock Carter Scott. He was a great basketball player and a good cog for that 1980 and 81 Ohio State team.
All right, guys. Anything else before we wrap it up, McGinnis? You want to gloat a little more? Or
come on, Sam. Tell us your thoughts.
No, this just goes back to exactly what I tweeted out. I had to stick with it. I mean, you tried to convince me yesterday to switch my pick.
You were convinced. You even told us you thought Gonzaga was going to win, but you said you were going to stick with your original pick. Did he not, Teets?
I did.
He did say that. You did say that, McGinnis.
I did.
And I admire his fortitude and will to stick it out there, Sam. I'm a fan now. I'm actually following you now.
Oh, Risley's a stalker too, so that's not a good thing.
Yeah,
you want to call the cops, get a restraining order. He's in LA, but you still need a restraining order because Risley's nuts. He played for Bob Knight.
I'm all over the place.
And he's from Indiana. Everybody from Indiana is crazy. And before anybody gets offended, I'm from Indiana also, so I know everybody's crazy.
So what's next here? Go ahead, Sam.
Well, I mean, number one, does Gonzaga go into next year as the number one team? They're pretty young.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Gonzaga will be anything different for the next few years. But I think Baylor's got a shot at that also. The whole tournament, the very first thing I thought when I looked at Gonzaga is I don't like teams that are supposed to win as number one seeds. just because most of the time they don't. And so I just thought, I know Gonzaga has a lot of stars, but I'm going to kind of shy away from that because that's usually not the case. Usually what it is with champions that I've found, at least seeding-wise, is that it's usually the second or third team that's supposed to, and usually the first couple get knocked out at some point.
So what you're saying is when people don't expect Gonzaga to win it all is when they'll win it all.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
You know what it tells me? What it tells me? The guys in Indianapolis sitting up there in that room that are seeding and ranking teams really don't have any more idea what they're talking about than the four of us do.
Throwing Loyola as an 8 seed, making Illinois as a 1 seed, play them in the second round. They'll tell you.
Yeah, and I say that every year when you got a team like UCLA who comes out of a play-in game to get to the Final Four. You got the number 1 seed overall getting knocked off, and I mean getting manhandled.
Yeah, but they got knocked off in a championship game, so you can't really.
I appreciate that, but still, they were the number 1 overall seed in the tournament, meaning they should have, on paper, according to the selection committee, won that thing.
But they were in a championship game, though, Steve.
Yes.
If they lose in the first or second round, I can see it maybe. But I think it was obvious that for the entirety of the year, the 2 best teams were on the floor last night.
Definitely.
They were both 1 seeds. We'll give them that. But overall, the NCAA is a joke anyway. So how can you expect them to seed teams right?
I'm going to tell you right now,
There you go.
having played in that game, the one thing, and I've told this to everybody, the worst feeling I could have ever had was getting to that game and losing it. That would haunt you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
I feel like I'd never want to watch an NCAA tournament championship game ever again.
Well, it would be like, playing in the Indiana high school basketball tournament during the time of Hoosiers, maybe, where it meant everything.
It's a great movie. You should watch that.
Yeah. And then to be the 6'8" superstar that's going to Indiana and Bob Knight comes, watches you, and you make it to the Sweet 16, and you play a team from Aurora and their tallest player is 5'3", and you lose to them.
Yeah, but see, that was the semi-state. That wasn't getting to the promised land.
I know.
I mean, to get to the promised land, which is a championship game, and then to lose that game and have to deal, you get a ring that says national championship runner-up.
Do they give a ring to be the runner-up?
Well, that's up to the school. The NCAA doesn't give rings.
I've never seen oh, sure, I know. They just take money.
Yeah.
They don't give any of it.
They give you a watch. They give you a bowl of Accutron.
Oh, hell. I don't like the NCAA. But hopefully the players will someday be paid for it. Sam Teets, anything before we wrap it up?
No, I just want to think that Baylor, I think, has a better chance of being ranked higher than Gonzaga going into next year because Corey Kispert, I believe, is a senior, which means he's going to be gone unless he uses an extra year of eligibility. I don't know if he has one or not. And I would be shocked, honestly, if Suggs didn't go to the NBA draft.
Yeah, but
so you're going to be losing probably 2 of your 3 best players.
Remember this, though. Those 1,000 guys in the NCAA transfer portal, a couple of those guys are studs, and they probably want to go play for Gonzaga so they can win a national championship. And it's hard to tell them what they've got coming from the high school. And I think with Gonzaga and Baylor, with the coaching staffs they have, they're going to be perpetually in the top 10, top 20 at worst every year because the guys are legendary coaches. I really think that now. I mean, anybody can win it all at Baylor is a legend.
Can I ask a poll question of the 3 of us or 4 of us here?
Sure.
Will Gonzaga ever win a national championship?
McGinnis, you can go first.
Silence. Yeah, I mean, will they ever win?
I'm gonna lean on the coaching here and say at some point yes. I don't know if it'll be this year or the next, but I think the coaching is good enough to get it done, and they'll continuously have star players there for the next few years at least. So I think at some point here they'll get it done.
I'm going to say no.
I'm going to say no.
I'm going to err on the side of no.
Yeah, I just don't think that they can get – they play in too soft of a league.
I don't think it's that.
I do. I do.
I think it's really hard to win a national championship nowadays. And
Yeah.
I think this. I think if you ask me, is Hubert Davis going to win it at North Carolina? Is Mike Woodson going to win? There's no program I can tell you right now in the future is going to win an NCAA championship. It's so damn hard now. I mean, every year we got a 15 beating a 2. We had a 16 beat a 1. I mean, it gets harder and harder with the transfer stuff. I think it makes it even harder. There's so many things that have to go right to win it. I mean, we talked about all the things that went right in 1981 for you guys. You could look back at almost every year and find a game that we didn't get to see that we thought would really be the game during that tournament. This year wasn't one of them. I think Mark Few's a great coach. They've got great players. I would say this, though. I would say if you gave me the top 5 programs that would win one over the next 15 years, I think I would put Gonzaga in that. I just think it's hard to say that there is a program that is definitely going to win a championship before the next 10 years is up, because I think it's so hard to do right now. I think it's harder to do now than it was in 1950. I think it's harder to do than it was in 1980.
Yeah, I think you got to put UCLA in that group too now. I think what they did this year with the coach they got with Mick Cronin, if he stays there, and their ability now to recruit and use the tradition of UCLA, that program can escalate as fast as anybody.
I'm going to disagree. I don't think they can. I think Mick Cronin, from what I saw at UC, is really good when he's the underdog. Mick Cronin, his last 10 years at UC, they were usually a top 5 or 6 seed, and they almost never got out of the first round. I think Mick Cronin's drawback is, and we saw it this year, other than the game against Gonzaga where they got hot, but now after watching Gonzaga play defense last night, it's not that big a deal. But his problem is he gets guys that play defense, which is great, but you got to be able to score at some point. Baylor's defense is not good enough to win a national championship if they're only averaging 55 or 60 points a game, because they would have lost last night. The thing that made them so great is their offense was damn near as good as their defense, and their defense transitioned to offense really well, which not every great defensive team does. Loyola Chicago was one of the top 3 or 4 defenses in the country, but their transition defense to me wasn't that great. I think that was the difference between them and Baylor. So I forgot what I was talking about midway through. So
yeah, it'll be very interesting to see where UCLA goes from here, because they only have 1 senior, so they'll get most of their team back next year, and we'll see then if this is just a fluke or if they can actually turn this around and make this into something.
I'll make this prediction right now. The Indiana Hoosiers will go farther than UCLA next year.
Wow. That's a bold prediction.
Mike Woodson will win over 20 games, and Indiana will be in the Sweet 16 next year.
That's not far-fetched, but I think UCLA can get back to the Final Four.
Because one thing you're seeing with Indiana, UCLA will never get to the Final Four ever again. I know I talked about it. Mick Cronin did a great job this year, but Mick Cronin's still Mick Cronin. There's limitations there. To me, he's like Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin is a great football coach if you give him guys that aren't that good, because he gets the most out of guys, which is why, even though I think Pittsburgh is going to suck, they're still scary because they got Mike Tomlin. And guys will go out and play for him, especially guys that aren't, maybe elite athletes. And I think that's the great thing. We see it in all sports where you got coaches that never win a championship, but they're great coaches, and they get guys to a certain point. And then when the program gets really good, all of a sudden they plateau off. Bob Huggins hardly ever gets out of the first or second round. Dude's been coaching for 50 years. He's had all the talent in the world. He's made it to 2 Final Fours, never been to a championship game. I think Mick Cronin and Bob Huggins was like the daddy of Mick Cronin. And Mick Cronin, just like Huggins, gets all these great defensive players and forgets to get shooters. So it's not a shot at Cronin, because I think Cronin's a great coach for what he does. But I think Mick Cronin 5 or 6 years from now won't even be the coach at UCLA, because the bad thing about what he did this year is now UCLA's expectations
have gone through the roof. Yeah.
There's no Sam Gilbert there. So
there's a lot of instant gratification out here. You want to get pretty, you can do it the hard way. You can go to a plastic surgeon.
Well, can you imagine if UCLA doesn't make the tournament next year?
Oh my God!
Cronin will go from being like a hero to being. They will want him out.
Dude, they lose in the first or second round. They're going to want him out.
Yeah.
I mean, Alford went to the Sweet 16. The next year, I don't think they made it. Then Steve Alford's got to go.
Yeah. One observation, and Sam's guys keep chiming on this one. I've been watching Indiana and what's been happening, and they had a lot of guys in the portal. And then Woodson comes. Now, almost all of them are coming back now. And there were some players in there that you might have said, okay, see ya. Sorry, because they're taking up scholarships right now that Woodson could be using to go out and recruit and fill players that he wants to put on his roster that work his system. Can the portal work in reverse for you too, where you're kind of like, okay, I'm not going to try and re-recruit this guy too hard. If he wants to go, let him go. But almost to a T, every Indiana player that went in the portal seems to be coming back.
Yeah, that's because they were all miserable with Archie Miller, who's just a horrible person.
Yeah,
anyway.
but some of them really, you could find better quality high school players coming out.
Yeah, but I think
Indiana.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say where Indiana is right now. You might just have to take your lumps for a year because really you don't know what Mike Woodson's going to look like at the college level. So you might have to just take a year of that before you can get those top recruits, anyways. Because I don't know what Indiana, despite changing the coach, obviously, I don't know where Indiana really sits here in terms of being able to recruit those kind of players. And they do have a bunch of seniors, so they are going to have a lot of roster spots open.
I think Woodson will be able to get guys in the portal that are originally from Indiana that Indiana didn't recruit or couldn't get, because I think Mike Woodson is still a big name in the state of Indiana. I mean, hell, no offense, Risley, but my favorite Indiana Hoosier of all time was Mike Woodson. And
mine too.
Yeah,
my favorite player of all time too.
Yeah, and I think when you look at this, I mean, I think this plays in Indiana's favor. And when you talk about there may be guys out there you want to recruit that might be better, I think the big thing that stands out to me here is before Indiana would lose players, they didn't want to be here because they were miserable. Now what you've given is the guys that are coming back are really bought into this now. And it's different now because these guys really want to be here. They really want to play for their head coach, where before we had guys that didn't really want to play for their head coach. Right. And I mean, Mike Woodson's a guy everybody wants to play for. And the thing is this, when you can go to the NBA and be successful, which I know people say had a losing record, but he went to the Hawks, who were absolutely horrible. And within, he got them to the playoffs multiple times. They were a high seed. He got the Knicks to the playoffs, which when was the last time that happened? I mean, people want to play for him. So I would say this, I would rather have 12 guys that are average that really wanted to play for me than I would want 12 guys coming out of high school that think they want to play for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and everybody knows, I mean, this is no secret, Dane Fife signed on with Indiana yesterday. Everybody knows that, right?
Yeah.
So that's a great move. That gets them
next head coach.
Yeah, and what they did, they just solidified their next head coach.
Because Woodson's 65. He might be here 10 more years, but Dane Fife's still going to be young as hell.
Right.
And the thing about Indiana right now, Steve, is this. They've actually built in a progression of coaching now, which they've never had in the past.
Right.
But, all right, we got to wrap it up, Steve, because I need to go get steaks so my wife can fix me one, because I got to coach football players from like 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock. So we're going to have to wrap this up. Plus, Teats gets a little shaky after we get to like the 50-minute mark.
I got to go get another haircut.
Okay.
It's only been 2 weeks. It's about as often as McGinnis shaves.
What makes you think McGinnis shaves?
Oh, he tries. He's got some peach fuzz there.
Hey, he may not shave that much, Risley, but he was right. So
he was right.
Hail
to Mr. Authority.
I think we just need to call him the professor.
There you go. I like that.
We'll call Teats Marianne. But Professor, where can people follow you on Twitter?
Teats, you gonna take that?
He doesn't pick the Super Bowl right, but pick the other team after doing it. He picked the NCAA championship game right for the right reason. Then he picked the other team. So Marianne can be quiet. Go ahead, Herb McGinnis.
So wait, Mike, does that make you Skipper and me Gilligan?
No, Skipper was old. And Gilligan was, you're Gilligan. Tell everybody where they can find you on Facebook or on Twitter.
All right, you can find me at SamuelMCG22.
All right. Marcus, thanks for listening. Go ahead, Sam.
Thanks, Marcus.
Yeah, you can find me at Sam_Teats33 on Twitter. We're doing lots of NFL draft content right now, so I'm hoping I'm going to be more correct on that than I was this past March Madness.
Well, you'll have it correct. You'll
when
have
is
picked
the
the wrong
NFL draft?
team to go to.
No. Here's what will happen. He'll pick the first 10 picks right, except for the fact that he'll tell them that's what it's going to be and then pick the exact opposite player. Even though
Does he have that Clemson quarterback number one?
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus. What? That's a stretch.
Yeah, you got Carson Wentz for the Colts, Risley, so be quiet.
We're good. We're solid.
Yeah, you're solid. The only one who's got a solid quarterback here is me and Joe Burrow. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Make sure you follow us at Grilling Truth. We will be back with an NFL show at some point, won't we, Sam?
At some time, like eventually.
And me and Mr. Risley. Thursday, Risley, Survive in Advance. What do you think?
Let's rock and roll.
All right.
Bringing it back.
Make sure you check us out there. We may have to do that on Rockfin because they don't edit out what we think. And what we think sometimes can be scary and offensive. All right, guys.
Survive in Advance.
Go ahead and follow us on Twitter at Grilling Truth. But for now, for Sam Teets, Sam McGinnis, Steve Risley, I'm Mike Goodpasture. You've been watching and listening to The Grilling Truth, where the legends